we are ready, I think, to move to the second part of our hearing of today. And so we will move on. And so in this second part, we will have Dr. Lina Alexandra, who is a senior researcher at the Department of International Relations, Center of Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, Jakarta. And we have Ambassador Kyaw Moe Tun, Permanent Representative of Myanmar to the United Nations. Ambassador Laetitia van den Assum from the Advisory Commission on Rakhine State and retired Dutch diplomat. So to all three of you, you are most welcome, and thank you so much for contributing to our International Parliamentary Inquiry into the global response to the crisis of Myanmar. So I open this second part of the inquiry as the hearing. As the chair, I am Heidi Hautala, Vice President of the European Parliament, and I am speaking to you from the Finnish countryside. So of the Inquiry Committee, we have here also Charles Santiago, Malaysian MP, and Chair of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. We have Honorable Mercy Barends, Indonesian MP, who's also a board member of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, and we have Honorable Nitipon Piwmow, MP from Thailand, and Honorable Amadou Camara, Gambian MP, also on the steering committee of African Parliamentarians for Human Rights. So just as a reminder to you, the intention of this inquiry is to provide a distinctly different and parliamentary response to the appalling atrocities that are being perpetrated by the Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, since the coup in February last year. We have seen that the global responses have fallen far short of the expectations of the Myanmar people and of international obligations and standards. So indeed, there is a legitimate concern that the international community's failure to impact change in Myanmar not only legitimizes the junta by default and worsens a major humanitarian crisis, but its inaction also risks emboldening other brutal regimes by showing that atrocities can occur with impunity. So this parliamentary inquiry will provide policy recommendations for effective action that international actors can take in an effort to save the lives, health, and livelihoods of millions of Myanmar people and prevent the further occurrence of international crimes. So while we are inviting witnesses to our hearings, calling for written submissions and requests for information, we would like to make it clear that the final report will be the result of the collective editorial decisions of the committee members. The IPI, the inquiry, strives to abide by the highest standards of collegiality and mutual respect across genders, ages, and cultures in its work. So indeed, now we start the second session of hearing number 2, having just concluded session number 1 with Foreign Minister Dato Sri Saifuddin Abdullah of Malaysia, whose session will soon be posted online for public viewing. And I have to say that I regret that we had some difficulties with internet connections, but nevertheless, the hearing proved to be extremely insightful and useful. So now let's turn to our 3 additional witnesses this afternoon, in Finland, I mean. So Dr. Lina Alexandra, as I said, senior researcher at the Department of International Relations, Center of Strategic and International Studies from Jakarta. I would like to give the floor to you for 7 to 10 minutes, and then we have questions. So thank you, Dr. Lina Alexandra.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm actually currently the head of the Department of International Relations in CSIS. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to join this distinguished panel, I think. For my remark, it's quite short because, of course, I would like to answer more specific questions later on. But I think my remarks will be limited to the questions on what has ASEAN done so far and also what else can be done. I heard I think the second part of the minister's remarks earlier from the Malaysian foreign minister, and I think there has been so much that he actually shared about this ASEAN's response. First, of course, at the outset of the coup, I think it is very clear that ASEAN's response has been very much delayed. It took couple months until ASEAN can actually undertake certain decisions to respond to the situation. And obviously after strong calls from the Myanmar people as well as the international community. And in terms of what has ASEAN done so far, I can say there are at least 3 limited achievements that ASEAN has achieved so far. The first, of course, the ASEAN 5-point consensus itself. Of course, we can always debate about this, whether we can consider this as an achievement or not. Obviously for us, there are a lot of weaknesses within the consensus itself. But the fact that ASEAN leaders could convene the special leaders meeting and come up with the 5-point consensus, we cannot deny the fact that it is on itself is the achievement, although it's very limited. Secondly, I think the fact that ASEAN so far still formally maintains the position of not inviting any political representative to any ASEAN high-level meetings. As ASEAN mentioned, the reason is to give the opportunity for Myanmar to focus on settling its own internal issue, which by many considered as sanction or suspending Myanmar's membership status in ASEAN, which I think is 2 different things actually. But the fact that ASEAN still maintained this position, I think we can consider also this as a limited achievement of ASEAN. The third, the fact that I mentioned it, I underlined this as very few ASEAN members have tried to engage with the pro-democracy groups. Although I should underline also that they have done this on different levels. I think obviously Malaysia is an exemplary example on this case, because we can consider Malaysia is the most progressive members of ASEAN to engage, that actually proposed for ASEAN to engage formally with NUG. While other countries like Indonesia, for example, seems to prefer maintaining informal communications with the NUG and UCC and other political actors in Myanmar. What else can be done? Lots of homeworks. I think we all already heard from what Minister Saifuddin already told us. Lots of homeworks, lots of hard questions to pose. But I think we can focus on 3 things at least. The first is to review and rejuvenate the ASEAN 5-point consensus. What is missing with the 5-point consensus is really the operationalization on how this consensus can be achieved. Until now, we haven't seen any, maybe we can call it term of reference or whatever, you name it, plan of action, whatever, basically to operationalize the 5-point consensus itself. Can push for the cessation of violence, an impartial process of humanitarian assistance delivery, and facilitating dialogue. And without this specific tool, that's why the 5-point consensus can be twisted, can be tweaked by everyone. First, of course, by the military junta. Secondly, also by ASEAN member states itself. In this case, I think ASEAN certainly need to make a strong standpoint, a strong position on the special envoy itself, because in the 5-point consensus, it is mentioned about the chair special envoy, while the expectation is to have ASEAN special envoy, which at least it means that his or her term should not follow the rotating term of the chair. And we from CSIS, basically, we have proposed this, at least to our foreign ministry, that the special envoy should be supported by an office or mission that is based in Myanmar to be able to perform its task. We can scrutinize later about the structure, whether because there has been discussion about ASEAN Troika, for example, as a format for the chair of the office, and so on and so forth. I think we can certainly discuss about this structure. But basically, there should be an office to support the work of the special envoy. Secondly, I think it is very crucial for key ASEAN members to prevent the normalization of the junta ruling by indicating their willingness to explore deeper engagement with Myanmar stakeholders that support democracy. This is not actually limited to NUG and NUCC, because what I learned from various communication with different stakeholders in Myanmar, there are also a lot of political actors in Myanmar, including, for example, the ethnic groups. There should be, I think, further communication with them as well. It is very obvious, very clear that the current strategy of not inviting political representatives from Myanmar is not working, because at the working level, for example, representatives from the junta are still being invited to attend the meeting. And what is even more sad is Cambodia has indicated that it might invite representatives from Myanmar junta to attend the ADMM meeting soon. So this is quite sad development, I think, because they say the junta has been quite cooperative in designing the corridor for the humanitarian assistance delivery, which is actually, it's not. The third point, I think I noticed about the question about the Indonesian chairmanship. This should be treated as a momentum. Indonesia particularly needs to take up the leadership to empower the 5-point consensus. Again, especially the role of the special envoy, as well as in the broader context is to push for the review of the ASEAN Charter to build an effective mechanism for the organization to deal with the internal conflict management. I think I'll stop there. We can certainly discuss further about those points. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lina Alexandra. Very useful from Jakarta. So now we have some questions to you. Who would want to start? I open the floor to questions to Dr. Alexandra.
Heidi, I can pose the first question.
Sure. Charles, please take the floor.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Dr. Lina Alexandra, for that interesting presentation. I'd just like to go back to the first point that you had raised about operationalizing the 5-point consensus. It'd be good if you can say more on the 5 points, and that is because it will actually throw some light into what should have happened but did not happen. But I also would like to bring to attention, also get your insights, that political dialogue is part of the 5-point consensus, which means that it is quite clear that in a political dialogue, all parties, all relevant parties, all stakeholders would be involved, meaning that the Aung San Suu Kyi's party will be involved in the dialogue itself. But when the when the special envoy arrives in Myanmar, he is not allowed to meet Aung San Suu Kyi or any of the other players. And that's my question, because you talk about operationalizing it. But here it's not about operationalizing it. Here you have a junta who does not want to work with you, who's throwing spanner after spanner and putting walls as opposed to bridges. So even if you operationalize, do you think that the junta really wants to have a political dialogue?
Well,
Over to
thank
you,
Charles.
Dr. Alexandra.
Thank you, Heidi. Well, thank you, Charles, for the question. That is actually, of course, the multi-million-dollar question, whether the junta really wants to have the dialogue. I think what I can say, they might. But the question, as you said, whether it will be an inclusive dialogue and the dialogue that we actually imagine, right? I think the thing is really the first is for the special envoy itself. I think the role of the special envoy to really push further to the military junta to actually allow him or her. I'm saying her because there might be a changing of the special envoy next year. To be able to get the access to communicate with all stakeholders in Myanmar. And then what I argue is they cannot do the special envoy cannot do it by just visiting one time, two times, while they're not really staying inside inside Myanmar. That's the first thing. Second thing also is to strengthen the capacities. I'm not saying this because NUG and UCC do not have the capacities. I'm not saying this, but I think the point is really to prepare NUG and UCC and all political actors. If at some point the military says, okay, I open up the door, I open up the table for negotiation, for the so-called dialogue whatsoever. What kind of preparation NUG and UCC has? Meaning that it's not only because we are talking about dialogue. Of course, you have sort of high goals, middle goals, and the so-called how to say, we call it in ASEAN as the common denominator, something that you can actually find it in the middle, So my question is really whether NUG and UCC have actually thinking about this. What are you going to present to the junta if somehow the opportunity opens up? I think that's my response, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions from colleagues? Mercy, please, and then Nitipon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Heidi, thank you. Thank you very much, Ibu Lina Alexandra, for your contributions and sharing today. It's very important for us as Asian Parliamentarian for Human Rights in this IPI inquiry for Myanmar. It's very interesting when you mentioned before related with the normalizations of junta ruling. The second is how to redefine related with the ASEAN Charter to add a point related with the conflict resolutions. My question is it enough with the Asian leader members with their consensus to do something internally, or we need the other international actors to do normalizations of junta ruling? The second is related with the conflict resolution to add in the ASEAN Charter. As we know that the conflict resolution have some critical steps from how to make the anatomy of the conflict and then take action for mediation to hard decision like suspended the memberships. Do you think is it possible to implement those normalizations of junta ruling, and the second related with the ASEAN Charter to add points related to conflict resolution? Do you have any idea related with this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ibu Mercy, for the questions. I think the first one regarding the normalization of junta ruling is actually the danger that we need to anticipate. If the ASEAN leaders continue to be ignorant to the Myanmar crisis. So, for example, the reluctance to engage with more political actors, the pro-democracy groups in Myanmar, by keep it low, by keep it only at the informal level, that will at some point bring to the normalization, quote unquote, of the junta. This is very, very dangerous, actually, one point. Second point, I think that the thing that has been discussed earlier with Minister Saifuddin is the election, the upcoming election that the junta actually plans. Because at that time, hypothetically, for example, the junta will ask ASEAN member states to become observers to the election. How will we respond, for example? I think ASEAN will be definitely divided. Thailand might be saying okay, Cambodia might be saying okay, Indonesia in limbo, I think, very ambiguous, not sure, to be frank, right? Malaysia will say probably no if the minister still stay in his position, his current position. Other countries, we already know the position, right? And by doing so, what will become is again the normalization of the junta. Because if the election happens, we already know, we can predict what will be the result, right? Even though the result is not really supporting the junta at some point, I don't know how, but if something happened which is not pleasing to the junta, they can always repeat the election again and again and again. And how will ASEAN respond to that? That is actually the danger. The second question on the ASEAN Charter. If we go back to the original recommendation from the high-level panel at that time that was created to establish, to create the draft of the ASEAN Charter. I remember at that time in Indonesia, that was during the time of the late Minister Ali Alatas. And the discussion was held in CSIS at that time, I remember. And there was a clause on this possibility of suspending or putting sanction to a particular member state that is violating ASEAN principles. And this is something that Indonesia needs to push again in the upcoming chairmanship, because this is very important. Otherwise, it will be watered down. Anything in the charter, you put all the nice things in the charter, nobody will observe it, nobody will obey it, because there's no specific point, there's no specific clause in it. So, and definitely, I think it is very clear that the challenges that ASEAN will continue to face in the future is much more related to democracy, promotion of democracy, human rights, good governance, rule of law. And this is something that we don't have. The current mechanism that ASEAN has is only for the interstate conflict. It's not for the violation of the charter. It's only the issue of interpretation of the charter. The point, if you look at the charter itself, it's only on the interpretation. If you have conflict on the interpretation of the charter, then the charter is saying something about it. It's not about the violation of the principles in the charter. And this is something that needs to be put inside the review of the ASEAN Charter itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lina Alexandra. I wished we had more time, and I think Nitipon, Piwmow, and myself, we had a few questions, but we have no time for answers. But let us anyway put the questions to you, so perhaps we can expect the written submissions. So you
Sure.
referred to the divided reactions by the ASEAN members to a hypothetical situation where ASEAN would be invited as election observers next year. So could you also perhaps highlight a little bit what are the different economic and financial interests of ASEAN member states vis-a-vis the junta and Myanmar. Can I ask Nitipon to ask his question, and then we look forward to your answers in written, if I may propose that. So Nitipon, please,
yes,
quite condensed.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question is very short. How can the ASEAN countries keep ignorance for the Myanmar? Because in the very near future that ASEAN summit, right, will be hosted by the Thai government, which is also like a junta as well. Right, even though after the election, so it's like I can't imagine that. On this November, it's going to be like a brother. A brother and a big brother and younger brother came from the same junta family, but just different countries. How can IPI or APHR or any other countries that can do, especially on this event, because like for our Thai Prime Minister, like he also a junta as well. He's gonna be like open this event and really warm welcome to the junta from Myanmar. What should we do?
Okay, so there was a question, and Lina, if you could give us some written responses, and if there's anything more you want to submit to our International Parliamentary Inquiry to the global response on Myanmar. So we thank you a lot. So please stay in touch. And now it's my pleasure to move to the third witness of this second part of our second hearing. And I would like to welcome Ambassador Kyaw Moe Tun, who is the Myanmar ambassador to the UN. We know that there were different developments between Myanmar and UN, and perhaps we have a chance now to get some clarity to those. So I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Kyaw Moe Tun for his remarks, and then we have questions to you, Ambassador. So you're most welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I really wish to thank APHR for having me here at the important hearing of IPI on Myanmar. I also wish to express our deep appreciation to the Honorable Foreign Minister Saifuddin of Malaysia for his clear view on solving the crisis and strong support towards the people of Myanmar. Sorry. Almost 17 months ago, Myanmar military perpetrated the illegal coup under the pretext of so-called electoral voter list fraud. Although the military was neither a candidate nor the legal authority to decide on any electoral matter. Since then, the illegal junta has held our elected president and state councillor and the other elected civilian leaders in hostage incommunicado. As you all know very well, but so for sake of continuity, let me apprise you of the continued worsening and deteriorating situation in my country, Myanmar. The junta has been inflicting enormous sufferings on Myanmar people, including by repeated brutal massacres and displacing people on massive scales. Since the coup, military junta has completely destroyed the rule of law, justice, and human rights protection, from weaponizing the legal framework to an extreme level, and in order to brutalize opponents into submission. junta forces have brutally killed more than 2,000 civilians, arrested quite a number of people, like more than 14,000, and then also arrested more than 11,000 people. Their lawlessness is clearly reflected by ongoing arbitrary arrests, violent raids into private homes, illegal confiscation of almost 600 private properties and assets, outrageous revocation of nationality, forced statelessness, farcical trials against elected leaders and politicians, and more than 200 life and death sentences imposed by secret so-called military tribunals. Recently, military junta sent State Councillor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi to a solitary confinement. Furthermore, they have wiped out residential towns and villages by artillery fire, burning down residential homes, and thus by displacing hundreds of civilians, including women and children. Now, over 1.2 million civilians are displaced. Among IDPs, some are unable to continue to survive within Myanmar, have been fleeing to take refuge in border towns near Thailand and India. I have received credible and verified reports that these individuals in a seriously precarious situations whereby they are in danger in Myanmar of death, torture, and arrest, and in danger in Thailand of arrest and deportation. Many are in trauma. Some of them are mentally and physically affected. Some have continuing concern for their health and safety. They are in indeed difficult situation and desperate need of immediate help. Madam Chair, more than 22,000 private properties, including religious buildings, has been burned down or destroyed by the junta forces since the coup. Meanwhile, the economy is also in a downward spiral. Now, nearly half of the population is equivalent to 25 million lives below the national poverty line. Basic food and fuel prices have skyrocketed. 40.4 million people in Myanmar are in need of humanitarian aid. Humanitarian assistance is much needed now, and we all need to make sure through all possible ways reaching humanitarian assistance to the people in desperate need, including the cross-border assistance. Moreover, the military regime makes every attempt to block access for humanitarian assistance to those in critical needs in violations of international humanitarian law. The result is an ongoing humanitarian emergency born out of military's attempt to control a particular population for their military objectives. This is deplorable in any civilized sense, but not surprising in Myanmar now, because it is what happens when an accountable military general make himself the sole authority of executive, legislative, and judicial powers, especially when the general has been emboldened by a sense of blanket impunity for past atrocity. We all are still in our mind of the military's recent atrocities against Rohingya. We have been seeing suffering of Rohingya people and other minorities across the country. Atrocities committed by the military in the past and present are pretty much tied with impunity that the military has enjoyed for decades. The deteriorating crisis in Myanmar is not a situation where the national authority is failing to protect its people. It is the situation where the military is deliberately attacking its own people to gain control over them by instilling terror and fear. The people of Myanmar have been largely frustrated at the limited level of response from international community to ongoing military atrocities. While there is no domestic environment that can ensure accountability for their atrocities, the people of Myanmar have cried loudly for application of the third pillar of R2P principle, that is, decisive collective action through the UN Security Council. This is the appeal that people of Myanmar have made repeatedly. Sadly, it has not been hidden yet. The people of Myanmar consistently raise a question: how many more innocent lives have to be sacrificed to have such decisive or collective action from the international community, in particular the UN Security Council? We are of the view that UN Security Council has the responsibility to protect the Myanmar civilian population, particularly women and children, from further military atrocities. Every day, the military junta is convinced that they will face no accountability for ongoing atrocity. Their forces become more emboldened to continue to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. Besides, the National Unity Government of Myanmar launched a declaration with the Registrar of ICC in July 2021, accepting the court's jurisdiction with respect to the international crimes committed in the territory of Myanmar since July 2002. However, the NUG in January 2022 informed the ICJ of withdrawal of Myanmar's preliminary objections to the admissibility of the jurisdiction of court over the case between the Gambia and Myanmar concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crimes of Genocide. Madam Chair, to end the ongoing catastrophe in Myanmar, the rule of law, democracy, and legitimate civilian government must be restored. We need irreversible transformative change towards a federal democratic state. This needs to start with the end of the illegal military junta. As long as the junta drops on, conflicts will never cease. The military brutality and reign of terror will never bring stability. Normalizing and legitimizing their illegal rule will only prolong instability and suffering in Myanmar. Here, I wish to stress that any short-term solution that has perpetuate military rule in Myanmar risks endless cycles of violence and instability. That is extremely bad for the region, especially for our neighbors. The military junta is creating an environment in which it is extremely hard for any serious political negotiations to happen. We are now witnessing how the military junta has thrown away the ASEAN fight consensus that junta leader himself agreed to ASEAN leader. That Foreign Minister of Malaysia clearly stated the point. Clearly, what we need is a unified and decisive coordinated regional and international response. Let me highlight the following points among others. First, we appreciate ASEAN for taking some positive measures such as denying the illegal coup leader a seat at its summit. This must continue, including all the political levels. We hope ASEAN good officers will also try to build confidence with the people of Myanmar and their elected representatives, including the legitimate National Unity Government, EROs, ethnic resistance organization, not just with the military junta. We are of the view that ASEAN alone cannot find ways to solve the crisis in Myanmar. International community should involve. Second, the United Nations, we are particularly grateful to all members states that stand with the people of Myanmar. The General Assembly has rightfully denied the illegal military junta. The legitimacy is its craves. It is vital that all member states to continue to do so. Third, to create conducive environment for sustainable peace and justice in Myanmar, the international community, especially UN Security Council, has a decisive and impactful role to play by addressing accountability for serious international crimes, such as crimes against humanity and ending impunity. The referral of the inhumane Myanmar military by the UN Security Council to ICC is urgently needed, and it will serve humanity. This will make major contribution to the transformative change we are pursuing towards a federal democratic future. Fourth,
Ambassador, Ambassador, I need to ask you to conclude. Of course,
Sure.
these concrete advices to us are very important, but some of them perhaps you can also send by written afterwards.
Sure.
We have limited time, so please, if you can conclude.
Thank you. Maybe some of the point I will take up during the questions.
Yeah.
Finally, I strongly ask UN Security Council, UN Security Council, ASEAN, and our neighbors and UN member states from the region and beyond to provide the people of Myanmar with much needed humanitarian assistance, prevent further military atrocity, help end the illegal military rule, engage the democratically elected representative of Myanmar, support ongoing international accountability efforts to bring perpetrators of serious international crimes to justice, impose bilateral and multilateral targeted sanctions against the military junta, and prevent the export of arms to junta. So as such, we strongly believe that you, the parliamentarians, can play an important role to make the request to be implemented and to be supported by the all large of member states. I stop here and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much for your valuable proposals from a very interesting position that you occupy. So we have a few minutes for questions only. So I would like to open the floor to colleagues to perhaps we do this time, we do all the questions at one time and then we have an answer by the ambassador. So who wants to start?
Heidi, can I go?
Sure, Charles.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Ambassador, for the interesting presentation. Countries look for legitimacy, and they also look for money as well as for weapons. In this case, Myanmar, you have that coming from China, you have that coming from Russia as well. Maybe money, and maybe arms, and maybe other support from other countries. My question is, the countries outside of China and Russia have not sufficiently prevailed on ASEAN or even on Myanmar to broker a process towards democracy. What are your thoughts on this? You are the United Nations. You meet some of these people. You participate in the discussions at the United Nations. And clearly, the Security Council decisions does not favor Myanmar. You have two guys who sit there, China and Russia, two countries, who actually veto what the whole world thinks is, what's going on in Myanmar on human rights violations, on democracy, on death, killing, malnutrition, and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else to ask questions? Well, if not, I will add one. The question about, excuse me, the question about sanctions. So what are your views at the moment about the prevailing sanctions against the junta, and is there more that you'd like to see? And is there a real impact? And what are the loopholes of the present sanctions? So, Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Nitipon raised the hand.
Yes, okay, I didn't see that. Yeah, so Nitipon, please take the floor.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I don't have question. I just want to say that I totally understand that. Regarding for your position, maybe it's quite hard to speak something. Yeah, that's one thing. If something that you want to share to the world, you can send. While IPI or APHR, and for us to speak instead of you to the world. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nitipon. So over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Even though I'm a diplomat, sometimes I won't be so diplomatic. So please do bear with me. Thank you so much, dear Mr. Charles Santiago, for the questions. Yes, of course, it is always the challenges and difficulty that we have faced in the UN, especially the UN Security Council. So you look at it, what happened since the 1st of February 2021. the UN Security Council issues quite numbers of statements, including presidential statements. There is so far no attempt to have a resolution in the Security Council. Yes, so I think the voices from the people of Myanmar is very clear. We want to have the decisive, unified action from the UN Security Council. That means we like to see a resolution from the Security Council. But we really aware that because of the some permanent members of the Security Council may vote the may vote the negative, may cast the negative votes on the draft resolution. But the demands that we always make is that we like to see any attempt in the Security Council to table a resolution that sanction the military and that prevent the flows of the arms to the military. So that kind of attempt that we like to see. How it can happen, of course, with definitely, you know, with your help, the members of parliament, definitely the respective government will listen to the voices, not only from the voices of the people of Myanmar, also the voices from the people of respective country, so that, you know, there will be an attempt to have in the Security Council. That is what we see. Is it may be veto, but we like to see that who are in the camp of the democratic forces and who are not. So that's sort of thing that we like to see in the Security Council. But we from our part here, we keep trying to persuading the members of council as well as beyond the Security Council to work on it and to try for the people of Myanmar. That is that we always we try, but at the same time, we hope that eventually that kind of attempt will take place in the Security Council. Definitely, we need not only we need the support not only from the permanent members, but also from the elected members. Support is also important in this case. So I also like to, you know, through your network and through your connection, we like to appeal that, you know, please also reach out to the members of the Security Council and the regional organization to make sure that the support is for the democracy and the support is for the people of Myanmar. That we like to see is. And then also with regard to the, you know, sanction, yeah, we thank those member states who impose a sanction against the military. That should continue. That is the impact, definitely. But what we need is that because also the special reporter on human rights situation in Myanmar also mentioned about what we need is the coordinated the toughest sanctions against the military is needed. What else? Because we always keep saying that we need to cut the financial flows into the military. That is very important. So we keep asking about, you know, the sanction on the gas and oil sectors. But some member states already done so. But we still need to have some country haven't done so to have the sanction on those companies like MOGE to be in the sanction list. That will be say a lot for us. So at the same time, also we need to push harder to the countries in the region and to look at their financial cooperation with the military. So to stop those financial cooperation with the military at whatsoever level. That is what we needed. So the sanction is good, but we still need more sanction against the military. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope all the questions were answered. I think so. So please, if you have any other submissions that you want to give to our inquiry, you are most welcome to do that. It would be much appreciated if you want to complement what you have told us. So I thank you for your time and participation. So now I would like to invite our last witness of this hearing today. We will hear from Ambassador Laetitia van den Assum, who is a former Dutch diplomat and very knowledgeable about the situation of Myanmar. So Ambassador Laetitia, please give your statement, and then we have questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair Heidi, Hautala, and Honourable Committee members. It's an honour for me to contribute to your hearing. And although your theme covers the international community's response to the Myanmar coup, I would like to take you back a little further to 2016. That also happened to be the time when the Rakhine Advisory Commission, chaired by Kofi Annan, started its work. But that's not the real reason for going back to 2016. I think it's important because 2016 is the year that saw the start of power sharing between the NLD and the military, and a period of growing tensions followed that ultimately contributed also to what happened during the coup of 2021. You know, in September 2016, when the Annan Commission had just arrived in Myanmar, an ambassador based in Yangon told me, well, you are the only game in town now. I was sort of taken aback, and then he told me what he meant, and he said that others in the international community had started to give up trying to find durable solutions to the instability and insecurity that had been plaguing the people of Rakhine State for such a long time. That worried me. And the fact that so many were apparently thinking of giving up, to me, if anything, it underlined the importance of our task in our commission. On 9 October 2016, just as our commission was about to make its first visit to Northern Rakhine State, our task became even more challenging than it already was. Attacks on security personnel in Mangdao led to completely, wholly disproportionate and brutal clearance operation. By the end of the year 2016, more than 4,400 Rohingya had been killed and around 80,000 had fled to Bangladesh. Everyone tends to know the figures of what happened as a result of the attacks in 2017, but really what happened in the year 2016 deserves attention as well, and that's why I'm mentioning it to you. On October 7, that was just 2 days before the start of the violence that I just mentioned in Rakhine State, former US President Obama revoked several executive orders related to economic restrictions against Myanmar. I was rather taken aback by this because we were faced with all of these tensions and the violence. But this had been a promise that the president had made to the state councillor in September. It was a controversial decision. And I've often wondered whether Obama would have signed off on it had he realized how tense the situation in Rakhine really was. Did the US believe that the Myanmar's military was prepared to gradually accept a less prominent role than it had been used to for decades? We don't know. But not only the US was misjudging the situation. In early November 2016, Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing was given the honor of being received by the EU's military committee in Brussels. That committee is the EU's highest military body, composed of defense chiefs. Min Aung Hlaing was welcomed by his peers while the media continued to report the atrocities committed as part of, as part of his ongoing clearance operation. And again, on December 2, 2016, it was back to Obama. He acted again and issued a presidential determination that ended several restrictions on US aid to Myanmar. 4 days after that, on December 6, the Annan Commission had a meeting with the Commander-in-Chief in Naypyidaw, and in that meeting, we raised the clearance operations. And the response that we were given was not at all satisfactory. In fact, it was one of the most troubling and hostile meetings I remember from my long diplomatic life. It was clear that the commander had difficulty accepting the role of a truly independent commission. It didn't end there, and subsequently, after things had sort of quieted down in northern Rakhine State, Mangdao in particular, in April 2017, Commander Min Aung Hlaing again went to Europe. He visited Austria and Germany and had several meetings with the defense industry on his program. Meanwhile, at the same time, access to Rakhine State for humanitarians became ever more difficult, increasing the suffering of the Rohingya and others. The military started to train and arm ethnic Rakhine militias, and that really scared the Rohingya. By early August, oppressive measures against the Rohingya had increased substantially, and around the 10th of August, fresh troops were flown in. I was in Yangon then, and the situation felt like a time bomb waiting to go off. And on 25th of August, it did go off, one after the Annan Commission had presented its final report to the president, to State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi, and to the commander-in-chiefs. There are lots of things to be said about the meetings and incidents I just mentioned. It was at best a very messy situation as far as the international community is concerned, but I will limit myself to two key points. It was clear that many in the international community had not expected the sudden outbreak of large-scale violence in Rakhine. They were still given the new government that had taken over in March 2016 an opportunity to establish itself. But even when the military's role in clearance operation became clear, this also did not lead to new restrictions on those responsible for international crimes. And on its part, the military received from the NLD the collaboration it sought. 4 days after the initial attacks on the 13th of December 2016, Myanmar's President's Office issued a press release that reflected the views of both the State's Councillor as well as the military. It basically justified the clearance operations on so-called terrorist and Islamist tendencies amongst the Rohingya. There's much more to be said, but I will leave it at this. Suffice it to say that it is very important that for you, I think, to look at how in your recommendations, what you can say about the importance of coordination among members of the international community. Because when I was looking at what happened in 2016 and 17, their priorities diverged. They were not they were not together. And that is something that is important as you make your efforts to try to help the people of Myanmar solve their problems. You need to have a united international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laetitia. So indeed, I'm very thankful that you bring these events of 2016, the power sharing year, and the successive clearances of the Rohingya communities and the international lax reactions to the president, warm reception in Brussels and in Europe, also the misjudgment by the United States. So perhaps my question to you, and then I open the floor to other colleagues, is that has the international community taken a look at those misjudgments and failures of that time, and or is it somehow affecting this response by the international community to the junta, which has been very much far from sufficient?
Thank you. I'm not aware of any, comprehensive look at those misjudgments. And there were so many actors and so many different reasons behind their acting or not acting, that it would be difficult to make one judgment on them. It probably needs to be investigated much better. But I think if you look at the situation at the moment, there are also many diverging opinions, and we all know how difficult it is to get the international community agreeing on one or two things, let alone to get the Security Council, which is so critically important in the case of Myanmar, to play a meaningful role. But it's important, and this needs to be looked at more closely. I think at the moment what we're seeing also is that, in deference to the important work that ASEAN has been trying to do, the international community has sort of held off and say, okay, we follow behind ASEAN. And I think that is for now, and we've heard also what the Minister of Foreign Affairs said earlier today, that is probably what needs to be done. But I think that you can only do that if you have assurances that the people of Myanmar, and particularly, I think those who are now trying to build up, their work that will enable them to represent them more effectively. And I'm talking about the NUG, the NUCC, and many other resistance bodies and operations. They have to agree to those who will want to work with them hand in hand in order to solve their situation. It's their call. It should not be imposed from above, because I don't think that works. And you see some international actors being more proactive than others. That's fine too. But ultimately, the rules of engagement in future discussions will have to be acceptable to the people of Myanmar.
Let me add one follow-up question, because you were so involved with the NLD government 2016 and 2017. So how confident you are now that the NUG and NUCC is really inclusive, or is it a kind of gesture that will vanish over time when situation changes?
It's hard to say, but I must say that I admire them for what they have done. To the extent possible, they have really worked hard and to develop, the functions of the government. And it started with the institutional decisions that they took about the NUCC, and others. They have done a lot of work already on, say, the federal charter that is under discussion. They have every week, I see them issuing documents that are very important sometimes for the entire population, sometimes for a specific group. Just last week at the Human Rights Council, the Minister of Human Rights, Aung Myo Min, issued a new document that gives new information about the plans and the proposals that the NUG wants to discuss with the Rohingya. that is you know, and in particular, I emphasize they want to discuss this because they are the ones that you know that prepare the documentation. But you have to have a buy-in from a much larger group, and that's what they're trying to do. We don't know what will happen. I think there is wide support for them. There are also other groups that have different ideas, and I think, for example, of Rakhine State that I know well, where the Arakan army, first of all, wants to find out more about the opportunities to achieve its dream of Rakhine, and that is their right. But you know, there's not much time much more time. We are moving into a situation we all know where economic and humanitarian situation is worsening, and leadership has to be shown. And it's very important that all these diverse groups have an opportunity to discuss amongst themselves how they can move on, how they can unite behind a leadership that's acceptable to all. And that's perhaps, you know, something that you might recommend that, you know, interested parties in the international community who are prepared to provide facilities and opportunities for people of all these different groups and agencies to meet and to talk amongst each other. The more they are able to talk and to exchange views in a country where the internet is out most of the time, the more that they have these opportunities, the sooner there's a chance of real leadership emerging, acceptable to all.
Thank you very much. We have space for one more short question. Who would want to take that one?
Heidi.
Mercy, yes.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. Frankly, I can say that there are like multi-layers or multifold conflict line in Myanmar, vertical military junta related between the people of Myanmar. The second is related with the horizontal conflict, not horizontal, but like a diametrical conflict between the states, Rakhine or minority ethnic groups, and the other Myanmar people. Is it possible to tackling only to tackling the junta military is effective to solve the root of the problem in Myanmar? Is it quite effective or no? Or we have to add the other action or the other steps to increase the critical awareness among all international actors, regional actors, as well actors, because I think it's very multi-layers of the conflict in Myanmar. What do you think about this situation? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good question. I think, to be clear, I was not suggesting that the junta is part of these many discussions that I was talking about. I think there are very few people in Myanmar who at this point want to see a dialogue with the military, and I understand them. For that to happen, if ever, a lot of changes would have to be made, and I don't think that can be done soon. So I was speaking more about the many actors that have emerged and that have impressed so many of us over the past almost 16 months now, I think. They should be able to get together and to voice their opinions. Of course, they cannot all get together, but to elect some of their representatives and to see whether some kind of a solid floor can be built for future discussions that go, beyond just initial talks to decisions about where the future of Myanmar lies and how its biggest problems can be overcome. And let me say that in the Annan Commission reports, we speak of, for Rakhine State, of 3 major crises. And these crises are the same all over Myanmar. It's a security crisis, it's a development crisis, and it's a human rights crisis. And these have to be addressed almost all at the same time. It's a formidable task. It's almost impossible to do. But these, what has made me also very positive is that we've seen, of course, since the coup, that at least among the younger people, the younger generations, there is much greater understanding of, what was done to people in minority groups. And of course, my own experience particularly relates to the Rohingya, but it's true for many other parts of the country as well. And so the will amongst younger generations is there, and particularly, perhaps you should think of finding a way of focusing particularly on these younger people, because there is still a lot of fear of each other. If you look at, for example, in Chin State alone, more than 40 churches, Catholic churches, have been destroyed. Mosques are being destroyed. Everywhere there is religious and ethnic intolerance is still there. And when it comes to later on competing for scarce resources, the ethnic tendencies may return. There's one thing that's important. In the 2014 census, there were questions about people's ethnicity. And all the reports of the census have been released by the government, except report 17, which is about the ethnic makeup of the country. I personally asked many times when we were in Myanmar for that report. They didn't want to give it to us. I don't know why, but I think that it may show that since the early part of this century, when Myanmar also started to become a bit more open, there has been such enormous streams of migration within the country that the traditional thinking about what the ethnic states are and what their makeup is may be incorrect. The only way to get it is if you perhaps confidentially ask UNFPA, who was responsible for the census, but was not allowed to release this report. And the people of Myanmar have to know about what the actual situation is. It's tricky because confronting people with, are there suddenly more Bamar than or less Bamar than was initially thought? Is particularly Shan State, are the Shan still the majority there because so many others have moved there? And that is a reality that they have to look at. What does it mean to them? Or would that actually be a good to have to do forward planning in a much more realistic manner than is now being done?
Thank you. I think this is a very valuable point because indeed there might be a future of solving these huge ethnic conflicts. So we probably would try to get hold of that UNFPA report that you mentioned.
Number 17.
Number 17, thank you.
The 2014 census.
Yeah, with your permission and with the permission of my colleagues, we might take a few extra minutes to continue the talk if possible. And colleagues, if you have a couple of questions, then please ask them. But before I give the floor to you, I'd like to ask about looking a bit beyond ASEAN. How would you judge the role of Bangladesh and India? And perhaps you want to mention other countries beyond ASEAN that could play a bigger role.
Well, I think to start with Bangladesh, of late, Bangladesh has become, rather difficult. It's not just over the past couple of months, but over the past 2 years, they've really toughened their stance on the Rohingya. And granted, they bear a huge burden, but since last year they have put barbed wire fences everywhere. They have, to prevent the Rohingya from, ostensibly, they say, to protect the Rohingya from outside people who want to commit crimes. They have also closed almost all the market stalls that were built by Rohingya themselves and from which they sold their wares to each other and were able to make some money because, livelihood opportunities there are practically zero now. And then the worst one, I think, is forcibly closing down a couple of months ago, maybe late last year, all the community schools that have been started by the communities themselves, leaving kids, that were 10 years old when they came into the camp and that are 15 years old now, with 5 years without education. And it's been difficult. I think the international community has been a bit too careful with Bangladesh. Obviously, we all owe them a debt. That's beyond question. But the circumstances are now such that they're really not up to the standards that UNHCR and others hold up as being important. Moreover, over the last couple of weeks, Bangladesh has funded campaigns in the camps in Bangladesh, which the Rohingya themselves used to demonstrate for their return. And it was funded by Bangladesh and probably was intended to also put the international community and Myanmar under pressure that we have these people here and they want to come back. What is happening now, I'm afraid, is what we've seen in 2 earlier Rohingya outflows of the country. The first was in 1978-79. The second one was 89, early 90s, when gradually Bangladesh reduced the living conditions of the people in the camps to such an extent that they were begging to go back. And that's where we, I think, are getting now. And it's really important that I know I speak with UNHCR in Bangladesh every now and then, and they're really worried about the current situation. They are not allowed to build structures other than from simple wood and bamboo that will also last during the monsoons. And all these structures are 5 years old and they're collapsing. So I think Bangladesh, I'm worried about, and I was very pleased to see a couple of weeks ago when Filippo Grandi of UNHCR visited there that he clearly made these points also to the government. Mm-hmm. But the international community is otherwise engaged. So that's as far as Bangladesh is concerned. But what were the other 2? You mentioned 2 more: Bangladesh and
India.
India.
If there's anything to say on that.
Yeah, that's also. It depends. Sometimes India seems to be becoming more interested in it. On the other hand, as you know, the situation of Muslims generally in India, including the about 40 or 50,000 Rohingya that live there, is dire. And the religious intolerance is considerable. So, but you know, it's difficult to consider that a country like India that has such a lengthy border with Myanmar would not take greater interest. They do take interest to some extent because some of the Indian resistance movements that hide out in the border areas, they want Myanmar sometimes to make sure that they do not tolerate him on Myanmar territory. So they have an interest. They have an interest also because, and that's an economic interest. They're trying to make these border states, and particularly Mizoram, more accessible, and are trying to make an outlet through Myanmar to Sittwe port. And they started that a number of years ago. It's very important for them, particularly now also, and when we see that China is making progress with its own port and SEZ in Kyaw Moe, also in Rakhine State. But you see some military cooperation, but there's not really very much. What I have suggested on other occasions, also in relation with the humanitarian situation, is to attempt to encourage to put together all of Myanmar's border states, China, India, Bangladesh, Laos, and Thailand, and to have them look together at, you know, what's happening in this country. First of all, you know, from a humanitarian perspective, because basically at the moment, only the Thai border is suitable for, you know, at least getting at least some relief supplies across. Mm. And I've often thought, well, this is the kind of thing that somebody like, you know, Secretary General Guterres, he should call the heads of state of these 5 governments and says, can you come together and look at your neighbor? Because it's, you know, what we're seeing at the moment also is, you know, a real risk of further marginalization. And even in some areas, you know, some of these small military, voluntary military units are starting to quarrel amongst each other, and they're starting to fight about, you know, who's allowed to tax the local population and so on. So there's a big hole, you know, alongst the border of all of these 5 countries. Of course, relations with Laos are not are different. That's mostly more related to illicit drugs, but you would have to have Laos as well. But I don't think it's been tried. I've mentioned it several times and it hasn't been done. Maybe it's been tried and it wasn't possible.
Thank you for your suggestion. We have to think about that. And if there is any information, recommendations that beyond what you have told us, we are very happy to receive it in written afterwards.
Okay.
So thank you for your very informative presentation. I'm sorry, colleagues, we have to close now, but I think it was worth taking an extra quarter of an hour to listen to Ambassador Laetitia van den Assum. So thank you very much and hope to stay in touch. So just to close this this hearing now, of course, all who have contributed need to be thanked. And so the next IPI hearing will take place on the 6th of July. No, wait a minute, 6th of July. Yes, that's next Wednesday. And in the meantime, may I remind you that we are welcoming indeed written submissions to contribute to our inquiry. And this is a call open to all stakeholders and persons affected by the crisis in Myanmar. And so texts are welcome to provide information and analysis about the situation in the country, as well as about the global response after the coup. So the details are all on the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, APHR website at aseanmp.org. So if there are members of the media who wish to receive comment from or interview members of the IPI, so I suggest to welcome to contact the IPI Secretariat by email. The address is ipi@aseanmp.org. So now I will conclude this meeting. Thank you. See you next time. So thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye. Thank you
Heidi.
so much.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. See you on 6th July.
Yeah. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye bye.